Welcome to the third episode of the IX Studio modeling series. In this episode, we will be UVing a basic object. We will learn how to cut UV seams, the importance of good UV space utilization, mirrored UVs, and we will explore the practical uses of some add-ons. Now, it's time to cover UV unwrapping. It is very important to think strategically about UV unwrapping, as Roblox has very strict limitations, and you want to get the most out of your textures. The limitations of Roblox make it so that the max texture size you can import is a 1024. That should be used for main assets, characters, etc. For props, you're going to want to aim for around 512. If we were to start UV unwrapping this, and we applied our mirror modifier, and we added seams to each individual leg, the textile density of each individual leg would go down as we have more space to cover. Instead, what we can do is stack the UV islands, so that each leg is just a copy of the first leg. It will save on UV space and it will allow for a high resolution texture. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a UV seam cut along the back side of the leg, where the player would be less likely to see it. To do this, I'm going to hold Alt and then click on the edge loop to select the entire edge loop. And then I'm going to press Ctrl E, Mark Seam. Now that we've done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bottom edge ring on the bottom of the leg, and I'm going to select every edge except one so that it'll unwrap nicer, so that it will open up like a soda tab. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top left, click and drag to open up a new window, and then I'm going to change it from a 3D viewport to a UV editor. And then I'm going to go back into the 3D viewport and hit A to select all of my geometry. And you'll notice that that's obviously not the right UVs, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press U and then hit unwrap to see what our UVs are currently at. Now we have what we're looking for. We could leave this as is and use this as a texture UV, or we can strain it to increase the effectiveness of our UV pack. So what we can do is we can hold Alt-click to select that edge loop, then you can press SX0 to make the edge loop flat, and then I press P to pin the UV. I'm going to do the same for the other side. Now that we have that, we can unwrap again, and you'll see that we get a much straighter version of the UV. The reason we have this big cross UV island is because of the square peg we have at the top of the leg. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the top face that won't be seen by players to save on some UV space. And then I'm going to move the vertices closer to the bottom of the top of the table to save on more UV space. I'm going to select those edges and add a seam so that it'll unwrap like a plus sign. So now let's do an unwrap to see what it does. Alright, cool. Now let's scale this down. Now I'm going to flatten out the divot in the top of the UV on the left. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the uppermost right hand corner, vertex, and then I'm going to press Shift S to move my cursor to that point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my pivot point to the 2D cursor. What that will do is when I select that edge loop and scale Y0, it'll make everything flat with that 2D cursor. Now I'm going to pin those as well. I'm going to do the same for the bottom as well. Because it's not unwrapping nice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually scale each one Y0 so that they're straight. So that it's not scaling to the 2D cursor, I'm just going to change my pivot point back to the median point. And what you can do is you can Alt-click on each edge loop and then press Shift R to repeat that action. Now I'm going to do the same thing except scale the vertical ones, SX0. Now we have a straight UV. Yay! So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these UV islands over to the side. To do this, I'm just going to press A, G, X. Just move it outside of the UV square. And now we're moving on to the boards, and you notice that there's geometry savings there too. What we're going to do is we're going to delete any interior faces. So we're going to delete the side and the top of each board. To save extra UV, I'm only going to UV the sideboard and duplicate it over. Because we deleted the top and side face, we don't even need to add any UV seams. We can just hit A, U, unwrap. It works really nice, but you'll notice that UV doesn't really make any sense. It should be more something like this, because it's way longer than it is tall. Let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and then press N to open up the object panel. Head up to the item tab, and then check the scale. The reason this issue happens is because you scaled the object in object mode instead of in edit mode. It reads the object differently when its object scale is different than its actual length. If the scale is not 111, then you must select the object, hit Ctrl A, and apply the scale. This will change how the UV unwraps. Now press Tab to go back into edit mode, hit A to select everything, and then unwrap it again. You'll notice this time it unwrapped perfectly. Great job. Now I'm going to do a similar thing to the other side. So now what you'll notice is the bottom face of this table will take up a lot of UV space. And it's something the player won't really see. So what I'm going to do, in the final version of this model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top face and then duplicate it down by pressing Shift D and then making it the same height as the bottom of the table, and then merging the corner vertices after everything's been textured. So now what we can do is we can inset the bottom face. The reason we're insetting instead of deleting it is because we want to have the curvature on the bottom edge of the tabletop. If it were just cut flat, some of the techniques that I'm using would be ineffective. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press 2 to go to edge select mode, and then I'm going to hold Alt and click on the corner edges, and then add a UV seam by pressing Ctrl E, add UV seam. First, to save some UV, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a loop cut down the middle by pressing Ctrl R and then deleting the other half of the table. And then I'm going to add a mirror modifier to make the table whole. So now we have everything mostly ready up. Let's check for any problems. You'll see we have a similar problem to what we had on the side slabs. Well, it's because the scale is wonky. Let's select everything and press Ctrl A to apply scale. Let's apply scale, UV unwrap again, and let's move on. Let's move the UV islands of the individual components outside of the UV texture space so that it'll be easier to pack later on. Now in this case, you don't have to do it, but I'm going to show it for example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the top middle and hit New. I'm going to create a new UV grid texture. If you don't see that button, what you should do is you should go to the top bar and then use the scroll wheel to access more of that menu. And it's going to be a UV checker grid. To check my textile density, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a material to the tabletop, and then on the base color, I'm going to click the yellow dot, I'm going to hit Image Texture, and then input the untitled checker grid texture. Then I'm going to press Z to go to Material Preview, and now we can see our textile density. So now I'm going to click on all other objects and then click on the tabletop last. Then I'm going to go to the Object tab, Link Transfer, Link Materials. Now we can see the textile density of all of it. I'm going to rotate the square peg so that it's not as confusing. I'm going to rotate it by 45 degrees to make it straight. You'll notice some areas have a higher resolution texture than the rest of them. That's no good. We want everything to be the exact same. To change the textile density, what you can do is you can press Tab to enter edit mode, select all of your mesh, and then scale it down in the UV. I'm going to try to match it to the tabletop. Primarily, I'm looking at the width of the squares. Looks like I forgot to apply the scale on the leg, so let's do that now. Press Tab to get out of edit mode, and click on the leg, hit Ctrl A, scale, and then UV unwrap the top square peg again. That seemed to fix a lot of the issues with the leg. To unpin something, what you can do is you can hit Alt P to unpin, and then you can re-unwrap. Now that it's the right shape, let's rescale it. Let's scale each UV island down to the right size. It's fine to eyeball it, it's not really that important as long as they're all generally the right size. Now that everything's the right size, we can start packing. To start with, I like to move all of my UVs outside of the boundary and pack the biggest ones first. I have an add-on that does this entire process for me. It's called UV Pack Master 3, and it's one of the add-ons that I would recommend buying. It costs $40. It does everything for me. It matches the texture density, and it'll find the optimal pack for each UV island. Because it is a paid add-on, not everybody will have it. I'm going to do it by hand. So let's start packing. Now you notice, at the current scale of everything, if I tried to pack everything, there's no way I would be able to fit every island. So here's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to select everything and then scale it down. Hit A to select everything and scale it down. In this process, you're going to want to try to get as many straight squares as possible, as it will make it way easier to pack them in the end. So what I did right there is I clicked on it and then I pressed L to select that UV shape, and then I'm going to move it up and over so that it's not going out of bounds of the UV. Now let's reposition the other UV. Let's select it, and then hit rotate 90 so that we can pack it on top. Seems like everything's too big, so let's scale everything down once more. Before downscaling, I'm going to try to rotate the other group of UVs to see if it'll fit in that spot. Seems that'll work much better, so let's scale everything down a little, see if we can get a better fit. And let's just keep rescaling until it does fit. Instead of scaling everything down, I'm just going to shrink those little sideboards a little along the y-axis. So now that we have a good pack, let's check if there's any issues. Let's check for any UV overlap, let's see if there's any vertices out of bounds, and if there are any, let's fix those issues. Now we can start the texture. Now just to demonstrate how much easier this would have been with the add-on, I'm going to run it through UV Pack Master 3. Instead of having to go through and do everything manually, I can just click a few buttons and then hit pack, and it'll do it all for me. Now, on my manual pack, I was able to use 73% of the UV space. That's a decent percentage of UV space utilization, but it can always get a bit better. With the automatic pack, it was able to get 80% UV space utilization. When you're laying out your UV islands and you're packing them, it's very important to pre-plan how you're going to texture it. In this case, I'm gonna be doing a wood grain texture, so if any of my UVs were rotated weirdly or not straight, the wood grain would come out looking weird as well, and that's no good. You're going to want to make sure your UVs are oriented in a good way. In this case, I'm just going to use the hand pack and see how it goes. Now that we have covered the basics of UV unwrapping, I'm going to roll some footage of me working on some pets to show the process done with minimal voiceover. In this recording, I added UV seams to the mesh, thinking about how the mesh will unwrap as I do so.